Not everyone gets to choose whether or not they become a public figure or, if you like, famous, even in the decidedly fleeting and immaterial sense that is internet fame or e-celebrity. Some people absolutely set out to become such, and for some of them it works, even as for most who make the attempt it does not. But more often, even people who step into public roles as performers, politicians, public speakers, artists, journalists, and so forth don't necessarily set out to have any further exposure than the minimum that comes with the job, nor can they control whether or not that remains the case, or if they do gain notoriety, what for. George Lucas didn't plan to be the Star Wars guy. J.R. Tolkien probably never imagined all of his scholarship would be outlived by Middle-earth. Leslie Nielsen never once imagined he'd be best remembered as one of the great comedy actors of his generation rather than a character actor from dramas. Michelle Yeoh was going to be a ballerina. The late comic book legend Stanley Lieber is known to the world as Stan Lee because he was originally saving his given name for when he retired from comics, where he'd worked for several decades prolifically but wasn't particularly distinguished, and planned to transition to novel writing, only to have the last big project that he and collaborator Jack Kirby worked on, which was meant to be his way out the door, Fantastic Four, become a gigantic career-redefining success. Today, thus far, if I had to choose, I'd probably rather people knew me best for this series, one of my other original shows, the work I've done for places like Attack, The Escapist, or even just as a film critic and independent producer in general than anything else. And while I'm obviously glad for whatever brought a new viewer on board, and even more glad for whatever keeps them coming back, returning, sharing with others, and particularly what keeps folks buying merchandise or contributing to the moviebob Patreon, it's always especially nice to find out that people were won over by one of the episodes or projects I'm particularly fond of, proud of, or took a lot of work. Just as it's also sometimes awkward to find out that someone's favorite is something from way back that I'm personally no longer 100% feeling great about anymore. All of which is a long way around to the point of recognizing that by far the most widely seen thing I've ever published, and possibly still best known for outside of regular weekly viewers and longtime fans, was easily a very unhappy, independently published review of the 2015 Adam Sandler comedy Pixels. This isn't my jurisdiction. I'm a film critic. Pixels isn't a movie. It's a motherfucking active crime scene. Scott Pilgrim but for assholes, celluloid chlamydia, cinematic strychnine, cultural vandalism, the burning of the Library of Alexandria by way of the Hot Topic t-shirt printing press. Is this what cavemen felt like the first time they saw what to them must have looked like something literally eating the fucking sun? Feels like the pride of Manchester, New Hampshire here broke into my fucking house, took a bloody backed up post-Taco Bell Miralax shit in the middle of my living room, and now wants me to pay him for the fucking privilege.
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
Now, this isn't where I tell you I've changed my mind about that movie, because I haven't. It was terrible, or that I think I went too far in that review. I don't, and even though I know it's pointless to try and head off this particular criticism because a lot of people are just going to assume it anyway, no, I didn't decide to do this episode because at the time, Uncut Gems had just come out and it looked like Adam Sandler was going to be nominated for Best Actor, and every film critic had to find a way to walk back whatever the worst thing they'd ever said about Adam Sandler was. Hell no.
I disagree. After
all, beating up on Adam Sandler, and by extension the dumb pedestrian tastes of mainstream comedy audiences, had been a pastime of film critics for about as long as he'd been making films. Really, for about as long as there'd been film critics, if we're being honest.
Adam Sandler is Jack. Adam Sandler is Jill. This November, Adam Sandler shits in your eyes, ears, and mouth. It's Adam Sandler in Rated R for Pirates. Fuck you!
The thing is, though, I don't really follow the pack when it comes to that side of my industry. So no, the reaction, positive though it was, to the Pixels video and seeing the message a lot of people took away from it didn't make me necessarily want to apologize to the film or to Adam Sandler or anyone else who was involved in the making of it, but it did make me bounce pretty hard off of the idea of attempting to deliberately do anything else in that vein, and to reevaluate the way that I proceeded, which has been part of the mission statement of Really That Good all along. And while at this point I can't even generally argue that most of his movies aren't great, or that many of them are in fact disposable or outright bad, I do like quite a few Adam Sandler movies, and I generally like Adam Sandler as a comedian and when he shows up to do it as an actor. And I think he's talented, that his talent and range as a comic is in fact extremely underrated, and that he's a genuinely funny guy, and while it doesn't make any real difference in terms of what we're talking about here, while I don't know the man personally, his production company does a lot of shooting here in the New England area, kicking quite a bit of money to local workers, local businesses, and I've never heard anyone in that context or in a general Hollywood professional sense have anything particularly negative to say about him. Apparently he's a really good dude, treats employees well, he's nice to people, appreciates his fans, shares the wealth, gives back to the community, remembers where he came from, doesn't screw people over, and my pals could use work, so I give them work is kind of the best reason you could have for otherwise questionable casting decisions. I mean, if I had the means and a studio paying for it, yeah, I'd make the grown-ups movies and put my friends in all the supporting parts so everybody gets a check, why not? But regardless, yeah, ask around the film industry and the only people you really never hear a bad word about, even from the people who hate everybody, are Keanu Reeves, who's apparently just some kind of living saint on earth, and Adam Sandler. So yeah, I don't know it to be a fact firsthand, but I've no reason to doubt it, so good on him.
This is me. This is how I win.
You having a good time?
Yes.
More pertinently, the premise of Really That Good is that things that are popular become so for a reason, and that reason is generally not accidental, cultural brainwashing, or that people are just stupid, even though people are in fact very often stupid. Popular art weaves its way into the social fabric and connects with people because it works in some way, on some level, that often transcends technical craftsmanship, originality, narrative depth, or even the bounds of good taste. And the plain truth about Adam Sandler is this: the reason he was still fronting a big movie like Pixel as late as 2015, striking that deal with Netflix, and just last year making so many waves by showing up and reminding everyone, by the way, I can also do this, with that gangbusters performance in Uncut Gems, seriously, if you didn't watch it yet, watch it, is that for a hot minute there at the tail end of the 20th century, Adam Sandler was the biggest comedy star in Hollywood, and at the time, no one had seen that coming. Even after he'd stopped having every movie be an automatic blockbuster, he still managed to be a top star, a successful producer, regularly headlining big hits, despite his original 90s kid fan base growing up and the film critic and comedy intelligentsia never really coming around to his side in great numbers, and you may or may not have watched all of them, as Netflix features have evidently provided serious career second wind as some of the most watched content on the platform, at least according to Netflix, even as his older, more well-known and generally better remembered stuff is still in regular rotation everywhere else. Suffice it to say, it would appear that Adam Sandler is in fact really that good. So maybe we can talk about why and how. To return once again to the perhaps inescapable subject of the infamous Pixels review, look, it's not the easiest thing to be both a critic and creator in the same industry, albeit at very different levels of each simultaneously. I'm not going to deny that, and it is weird. I had a smattering of professional connections within the real film, TV, and games industries beforehand, but, and I'm not mentioning any names here, so don't ask, probably the first time someone in the business that I genuinely admired and would call myself a big fan of beforehand reached out to me privately to say they saw something I put out and liked it was the Pixels thing, so that was cool. It got over 2 million views. Howard Stern played it on his show. The New Yorker wrote about it and interviewed me, and in that interview I got to say fuck this guy about President Trump, which is probably the thing I'm most proud of out of the whole thing still. On the other hand, I do have some reason to suspect that one or more of the actors in the actual movie might have seen the video and may have been kind of pissed off at it, and that doesn't feel great, but it's also not something you can control, and that, to the best of my ability, I don't let influence what I say about whether or not I think a movie or show or whatever is good or bad. That having been said, looking back at that moment, there were a few things that didn't sit exactly right with me. Not so much about what I'd made, but how it was received.
Please find the pattern and anticipate.
I don't know the pattern!
You're welcome.
For me, that particular video was something released as part of a larger body of work, represented an uncharacteristic right after the movie rage on blast take that came out in a specific context of being annoyed with the omnipresence of a particular aesthetic of filmmaking being applied to a particular type of cynical branded IP repackaging and nostalgia marketing, and the much more broad general sense that the wheels were starting to come off the engine of society to some extent. It certainly wasn't like the majority of my other reviews, and it also wasn't an attempt to reinvent or rebrand myself as a personality, but for many, maybe even most of of the people for whom it was their first exposure to what I did, I quickly realized that it was being taken as a kind of call to arms or mission statement against, like, mainstream Hollywood comedy, more specifically against the films of Adam Sandler, who hadn't had a film be either a major box office hit or well received by film critics in quite a while, and was en route to a then unusual direct-to-Netflix deal that was the talk of the industry, framing him as an over-the-hill comic running out the clock on films that were mostly make-work projects for his comedian friends. And while the question of whether the misses have continued to outnumber the hits clearly remains in the eye of the beholder, what is not in dispute is that audiences and the general pop culture have clearly not had enough of Adam Sandler just yet.
You're the best person I know. That's why you're a hero.
So since we've never done an actor filmography instead of an individual movie on the series before, let's briefly talk about parameters, i.e. what does talking about Adam Sandler actually entail? Putting it bluntly, cutting to the chase, we're not doing a career retrospective. We're not doing a biography, we're not doing some kind of comprehensive auteur analysis. This is a show about movies, so the idea is basically we're zooming in tight on the general concept of Adam Sandler movies, and fortunately in this case, there's not that much disagreement as to what that means. Apart from some early cameos and supporting roles in movies like Coneheads, Shakes the Clown, and Airheads, Sandler broke out as a bankable feature lead almost immediately and established an identifiable brand backed up by a signature style, group of collaborators, recurring aesthetic, and set of themes with a concurrent speed, specifically in a marathon turn-of-the-century 5 films in 5 years blitz between 1994 and 1999, encompassing Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, The Wedding Singer, The Waterboy, and Big Daddy, along with supporting roles in Bulletproof and uncredited cameos in Dirty Work and Deuce Bigelow, Male Gigolo.
We eat the pig and then together we burn! Burn!
What you talking about, Satan?
Come with me!
While those 5 main films are all unique in their own way and indeed demonstrate both Sandler's range as a comedian and actor within what's still clearly his own comfort zone at the time, they firmly established in the public consciousness and industry shorthand what an Adam Sandler movie was more deliberately than had almost any other American comedy star in then recent history. By the time The Wedding Singer was being released, going to an Adam Sandler movie meant pretty much you knew beforehand the tone and tempo of comedy you were going to see, which other comedians and sort of famous celebrities were likely to be the guest stars, the kind of jokes you'd get, the music you'd hear, and even though they weren't sequels to one another and Sandler wasn't playing the same character transposed to different situations like The Little Tramp or Ernest P. Worrell, he wasn't not doing that either. And if there was any compulsion on Sandler's part to definitively break out of this paradigm, the decades since haven't exactly demonstrated such. Even as he's branched out, he returns to the same set of reliable formulas regularly, continues to work with a reliable, if also increasingly expansive pool of regular collaborators, named his production company Happy Madison, and appears overall to not be plagued with the same fears of typecasting or unseriousness that weighed on fellow 90s comedy icons like Mike Myers or Jim Carrey. Which, yes, is basically probably a too long way of saying that I think we can do this by keeping our focus mostly to the 5 first big Adam Sandler movies that pretty much everyone saw, remembers, and knows, partly because, perhaps by design, more likely by chance, they roughly comprise the foundations of the main modes that he returns to over and over as a comedy actor. Since it might have been a little while, let's all get on the same page vis-a-vis the 5 original Adam Sandler movies. Billy Madison is about a spoiled rich idiot fail-son, played by Sandler, who learns that his billionaire hotel magnate father plans to name his mean vice president to take his place on retirement rather than Billy because Billy is stupid and obviously unfit to run a company. Billy objects because said vice president is a jerk who he knows will treat the other employees badly, and a compromise is reached to set up the premise of the film. Since Billy never actually completed any schooling without his father bribing the various schools he went to, he has to re-enroll in an abbreviated version of every level of education from kindergarten to high school and successfully pass in order to prove himself worthy of his inheritance, which he does, sort of, but mostly learns about hard work, value of friendship, actually growing up, etc.
I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna be a teacher.
In Billy Madison, we find the first emergence of one of Adam Sandler's most dominant comedy modes, indeed his baseline, Adam the Adult Child.
Holy jeez. Look at what we got here. That silly penguin is back again.
No, Mr. Madison, they're not penguin. You got too much sun today. They're no penguin.
Now, we'll dig into the nuances of that more in a bit in the next section, but what's mainly noteworthy is how this persona crosses into and informs so many of the others, as we'll see, but also how it arrived as distinct from the more prominent 90s comedy protagonist archetype of the slacker and the twin 80s ideals of the rake and the boor in ways that weren't immediately apparent.
Who would you rather bone? Meg Ryan or Jack Nicholson?
Jack Nicholson now or 1974?
74.
Meg Ryan.
The film was received to generally unfavorable reviews from mainstream film critics, who mostly compared Sandler's act unfavorably to that of Jim Carrey, another sketch comedy transplant who also just finished having an unprecedented hot streak of a blockbuster year, and who at the time they didn't much care for either. In fact, while it won't be the main focus of the timeline here, it's worth keeping in the back of your mind that the breakout of Adam Sandler's rise as a comedy star was unquestionably colored by occurring in tandem with that of Carrey, with Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all having hit in 1994, and also that of his friend and fellow SNL alumni, the late Chris Farley, with Tommy Boy arriving in theaters just 2 months after Billy Madison, in which he also appeared.
Hey, who threw that?
I'll turn this damn bus around. That'll end your precious little field trip pretty damn quick, huh? Shit.
Happy Gilmore, often called the best of Sandler's early vulgar films, is a sports comedy with Sandler as a violent-tempered but basically decent wannabe hockey pro who discovers that his singular slapshot skill translates to a powerfully accurate golf drive that he can use to hustle money to save his grandmother's house from being repossessed by the IRS. He joins the pro golf circuit with aims of winning the full payout, where his unconventional style and loud, obnoxious persona make him a media sensation but also the enemy of a traditional-minded but unscrupulous pro who'll do anything to stop him.
It's Shooter's turn. And Shooter's not about to let his reign at the top be spoiled by some freak, sideshow clown.
Did you just call me a freak? I was on this tour for one reason, money. But now I got a new reason, kicking your ass.
Well, I'd like to see you try. Let's do it then. I meant on a golf course.
Hey, what is going on here, huh?
Oh, I was just, looking for the other half of this bottle.
While retaining elements of the adult-child persona, as noted, it's almost always in there somewhere. As a character, Happy brings us what is eventually the most prominent Adam Sandler leading role type, Adam the Truth Teller.
Oh, man, that was so much easier than putting. I should just try to get the ball in one shot every time.
Good play.
Happy Gilmore is a fundamentally average, almost militantly ordinary person who enters into unusual spaces and generates humor by observing obvious contradictions and/or, in comedian terms, calling it like he sees it, and earning audience sympathy by calling out social hypocrisy or causing a disruption to perceived injustice.
Take my last buck.
This is the last time I'm gonna tell you.
Oh, come on. He's
Stay
just trying to make some money. Leave him alone.
In this case, it's the juxtaposition of modern professional sports competitiveness and media stakes and golf staid traditionalism is dissonant, and it's funny to see someone finally just say so. And also, Christopher McDonald's Shooter McGavin is a really familiar, specific breed of asshole, and it's righteously entertaining to see him brought down.
Is this your ball?
Yes, it is.
It struck my foot.
Situated somewhere between the Shakespearean King's Fool archetype and a more conventional comedy straight man, Adam the Truth Teller seems to be the recurring persona closest to Sandler's real personality, or at least the one he wishes to project. It's the starting point from which he tends to give his best performances, where he feels the most natural and realistic, and it tends to bring out the best in the overall filmmaking happening around him. The Wedding Singer was the film that, at least for the length of a single film, turned a lot of critics around on Sandler, who at the time they'd pretty much instantly hated across the board, and Billy Madison, and hated even more so for being popular anyway and continuing to thrive regardless of what they thought.
Losing his mind. And I'm reaping all the benefits.
It's a kinder, less confrontational mode of comedy, and a then early example of 80s nostalgia throwback humor in which he plays a titular wedding singer who spirals into depression after being abandoned at the altar by his own fiancée, only to then fall hard for Drew Barrymore as a bride-to-be engaged to a guy who our hero can tell is a jerk and must try to win her over from. Here we find the first instance of Broken Adam, characterizations in which Sandler presents himself as an open wound, a mirroring of the confident aggression that characterizes his other personas.
Well, I have a microphone, and you don't.
This is separate from being simply vulnerable or sympathetic, as it applies in some other cases. His broken characters aren't simply wounded, but fundamentally shattered in some respect, and extremely open about it, if not always consciously. If Happy Gilmore is a more aggressive, direct-to-the-point evolution of the classical comedy straight man, Wedding Singer's Robbie Hart is a similar boiling down of the comedian as trauma sufferer, literally begging to be rescued from the misery of his circumstances.
Oh, somebody kill me, please! Somebody kill me, please! I'm on my knees! Pretty, pretty, please! Kill me! I want to die!
No, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong. Mama's right.
Mama's right! Something wrong with medulla oblongata.
The Waterboy places Sandler back into the more extreme cartoonish mode of Billy Madison, but this time ramped up even further and surrounded by characters who embody a similarly exaggerated level of outsized personality. Set in a broad caricature of the deep American South, Sandler's Bobby Boucher is a bullied and perpetually abused waterboy who may or may not himself be afflicted with an undefined mental handicap for a winning local high school football team who, when fired, goes to work for their underdog rivals, whose coach discovers that encouraging Bobby to release his pent-up emotional frustrations transforms him into a fearsomely effective linebacker.
Best tackler I've seen since Joe Montana.
Joe Montana was a quarterback, you idiot.
I said Joe Montana.
This leads to social and academic opportunities previously denied to Bobby by his manipulative and overbearing mother, culminating in an extremely broad parody of be-yourself personal growth narratives and feel-good sports movies that also cemented Sandler's long-running tradition of coaxing respected older talents like Henry Winkler and Kathy Bates to join in on the silliness.
You off Gallivant with your fancy foosball friends at school while I'm sitting here all day with nobody to keep me company except Steve?
Gatorade.
H2O.
Gatorade.
H2O.
Water sucks. It really, really sucks. Water sucks.
No, stop
it
saying
really,
that.
really
You don't mean that.
sucks.
You're the MVP of the Bourbon Bowl. How do you feel? I love Mama.
While elements existed before, most notably in the drunk scenes of Wedding Singer and the hallucinations in Billy Madison, Bobby Boucher in Waterboy is the first feature-length deployment of the comedic mode Sandler gained the most notoriety for in his stand-up, sketch comedy, and album performances, Adam the Human Cartoon. Bobby is a broad, larger-than-life caricature, both of the Deep South and plausibly, though not confirmed outright, of what then might have been termed the intellectually impaired, and while the rest of the film is also suitably cartoonish, it's Sandler's muggy, funny voice affect, elastic physicality, and the implicit humor in the switch from that to the rage case attack mode that drives the spirit of the humor.
Blue 52! Blue 52!
Hut! I forbid you to talk to that enchantress. She's the devil.
She's not the devil. She's the most beautiful woman in the world.
I never said she was the devil.
She's the most beautiful woman in the world.
Oh, please don't hurt me.
Stylistically and in terms of overall quality, it was generally seen as a step back after the more mature Wedding Singer by critics, but as we'll explore further in a moment, that delicate immaturity is part of what drives not just this film, but Sandler's overall long-term success, an understanding of and lack of pretense or shame about the fact that if your movie is funny and not playing only to adults, it's probably also playing to kids.
So what I do is I start tackling the quarterback unless he give the ball to somebody else, in which case I'll try to tackle that person.
Gentlemen, which brings me to my next point. Don't smoke crack.
Which brings us to, perhaps not coincidentally, Big Daddy, the last film in Sandler's ultra-successful hot streak, which came to an end shortly thereafter with the expensive and less overwhelmingly well-received in terms of box office misfire, Little Nicky. Placing Sandler back in a realistic setting once more playing the straight man, it's a reliable entry into the frustrated adult comedian versus funny child subgenre, in which he's a mostly satisfied childless bachelor who has to care for an orphan who may or may not be the previously unknown out-of-wedlock son of his about-to-be-married best friend.
I wet my bed.
There you go, all right? No more wetness.
Though not as well liked by mainstream reviewers as The Wedding Singer, it was received as another strong indicator of a maturing comedy career. Big Daddy delivers, later than most comics get around to in terms of cycles, but again, remember, this all happened across a 5-year hot streak. Adam the Straight Man. While the trailers tease the film around the supposedly outlandish, possibly shocking premise of an irresponsible troublemaker like Happy Gilmore having to take care of a small child, and while he's still certainly filling the 90s slacker archetype, in the actual film, Sandler's role is to be a somewhat regular person, relatable in terms of target audience, with the generally mild problem of needing to grow up a bit, whose comedy is going to come from having to react to situations generating by the actual chaos agent, the kid.
I win.
Why do you win?
I got a 2, a 4, a 10, an 8, 8 and a 6.
I don't understand. Why do you win?
Because I win.
Grown-up actors stressed out by kids, of course, is a popular comedy subgenre in and of itself, but as we'll discuss presently, what makes Big Daddy and Adam Sandler in it a bit different is that for all the build-up of the angry, aggressive comic having to manage a sweet little kid, the film diverges from the likes of Kindergarten Cop or Mr. Nanny, in that it seems to be more in tune with the kid's psyche even as it's told from the adult perspective. So let's think about that. As previous installments of the series have discussed relating to films like Ghostbusters and Star Wars, the transition from the Hollywood of the 70s to the 80s, and with it the rise of the so-called blockbuster mentality in the action and comedy genres, involved a series of steep learning curves for many of the filmmakers and actors who came to specialize in them, specifically a relearning of what the new audience that had returned to mainstream movie theaters now was, and a recontextualizing of what that meant in terms of how and why the films that were becoming hits were becoming hits. Many of the big-scale sci-fi features that immediately attempted to recreate the success of Star Wars, for example, did not precisely understand that George Lucas had not simply won the global audience's attention by making old-fashioned serial sci-fi but bigger. He tapped into a ready-made vein of baby boomer and soon-to-be Generation X pulp fantasy, sci-fi, comic strip, RPG, Saturday morning, cartoon, psychic milieu that was already waiting for him, and in many respects, this was news to even Lucas himself. Comedy, in the era of the post-70s blockbuster, had its own learning curve, but with a slightly different trajectory given that the genre had so long been made to see itself as the second-tier opening act to the spectacle in the first place. The notion that the superstar screen comedian was not only returning, but having room for more faces at once than the marquee dominating phenoms of a Martin and Lewis or a Hope and Crosby was the explosive payoff on top of the general 80s comedy mushroom cloud, encompassing the stand-up and improv boom, the sketch comedy revival, and the sitcom rush. But just as was the case with genre film blockbusters, many of the star performers who revolutionized American humor in the 60s and 70s were soon caught off guard by a stark difference between the laughs that had carried them to theaters versus the laughs they might have been looking to chase once they got there.
Whoa! Are we in Metropolis yet?
Nope. I'm just gonna make a little stop. Right over there.
Because this is about Adam Sandler and not the history of American comedy, but the context is nonetheless necessary, I'm going to try and condense this as much as possible, so if you know any or all of this already and think it sounds like an overgeneralization on my part, fine, guilty, it's a generalization on my part. Sorry?
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
So, most of the comedians who became big movie stars in the early to mid-80s finally broke out as the hip new thing young comics in the mid to late 60s and 70s did so mainly from the realms of improv, underground, stand-up, college humor magazines, satirical magazines, radio and sketch comedy, etc. By and large, the outlets and the individuals who made the biggest impact and thus the most prominent names for themselves did so by successfully combining two schools of humor that previously weren't considered marketable fusion. Urbane, topical, reference-heavy wit that both relied upon but also flattered and rewarded an audience's assumed intellect, knowledge, familiarity with references and current events, combined with the aggressive, puckishly anarchic, often sexually charged, perpetual teenager comic sensibilities of blue humor for time immemorial. Or if you want more of a shorthand on that, Lenny Bruce imitators. This, of course, clicked because these comics' generation of prime disposable income consumers, and for the most part peers, baby boomers, were the then new for the American middle class position of having gone to college in really big numbers, so not only was your mildly racist reference to Sigmund Freud's cigar and your biting observation about the Johnson administration being the same joke actually a mainstream laugh-getter now, it was the new hotness. But after a decade or so of taking these acts from the underground to the albums to the likes of National Lampoon, Second City, and SNL, when it came time for the hip comedy generation to become the blockbuster comedy movie generation, the world had kinda shifted under their feet.
Once again, things that could have been brought to my attention yesterday!
To simplify further and get us back on track more efficiently, a lot of the generational and cultural specific subtext that had lifted that whole moment in time receded as it was wont to do, and those that remained didn't all catch on at once that they'd done so because people really liked their text, basically. Think of it sort of like if the Beatles had happened in reverse, you know? Like if the White Album came out first, and then by the time they were on top of the world, it was like, huh, I guess the socially conscious experimental moment is sort of past for people, lads. Oh my. Well, I've got an idea. Maybe we could all get like bowl cuts and sing about girls and dancing for a spell then. I apologize for my terrible John and Paul impression.
Don't you agree, John Lennon?
Yes, Dewey Cox. With meditation, there's no limit to what we can...
Imagine.
What do you think, George Harrison, of the Beatles?
I don't know, I'm just trying to get some more songs on the album,
And as Ringo Starr, I'm not so interested in meditation. I just like to have fun.
I like the little one.
It's so dark in this tent, It reminds me when the Beatles, the four Beatles, us.
From Liverpool?
Yes, we are from Liverpool. We used to play those dark clubs in Hamburg. You remember that, Paul?
Of course I do. I booked them. I'm the leader of the Beatles.
The canary in the coal mine for this was almost certainly Animal House, i.e. if you look at the arc of that film, the narrative and screenplay, you know the prior history of National Lampoon brand name they were initially selling the movie clearly on. Obviously it's Otter, Boone, Pinto, and Flounder who are the main characters who the writers and filmmakers center and identify with, especially Otter and Boone as the above-it-all erudite hucksters, but the audiences and popular culture immediately determined that as far as they were concerned, the main character of Animal House was Bluto. But the ultimate out-in-the-open definitive flashpoint was probably the production of Caddyshack. Hey, the other classic golf comedy. Now how about that? See, I was going somewhere with this the whole time.
The price is wrong, bitch.
Caddyshack was written and went into production as a rowdy but sincere coming-of-age comedy about two young working-class guys diverging life paths during an eventful summer working as golf caddies at a country club populated by a supporting cast of colorful, wealthy supporting characters. Since this was a lower-budget early feature for a lot of the behind-the-scenes talent and the main actors, said supporting cast was filled out by a murderer's row of seasoned comedy professionals and some of the hottest names in new comedy, so there would pretty much always be funny stuff happening in the B-plots. Sadly, the production was a famously mishandled disaster, hampered by bad weather, poor management, and an open flow of drug use and off-hours partying and misbehavior. So, long story short, the planned version, if it ever was going to be any good, was basically unreleasable garbage, but all those professional comics they hired to do the secondary characters still did their jobs really well, because they were professional comics.
My dinghy's bigger than your whole boat!
You take drugs, Danny? Every day.
Good.
I said freeze, gopher!
Hey, somebody step on a duck? Hey, I should have stayed home and played with myself.
So the producers threw out almost all the main plot and chopped it up into a wacky slapstick ensemble comedy that also had a crazy puppet gopher, and it became a smash hit comedy classic that audiences loved, even, perhaps especially, younger audiences who were too young to give a shit or understand about the sex jokes or romantic subplots, but liked all the physical humor, curse words, and grown-ups falling down and crashing into stuff, while slightly older teenagers enjoyed feeling like they were getting away with something via those same jokes and the occasional nudity. This would effectively become the operating two-track mode of money-making big-screen comedy in the 80s, perhaps cemented permanently by the high-concept Ghostbusters at the decade's midpoint. Talent who'd honed their act, skill sets, even entire characters and concepts around satirical humor for adult audience, finding their biggest success only when those acts connected with a youth audience where the connection was only to its broadest and most visceral aspect. A youth audience laughed at the physical humor and over-the-top characters in Caddyshack, while the narrative aspect of old money versus new money and the working class battling for supremacy flew over their heads. A kid audience that could enjoy the Ghostbusters busting ghosts without needing to know which aspect of 70s possession movies or contemporary small business politics were getting arousing, who could get the slapstick appeal of Police Academy even if more than a little of the confused political satire about affirmative action, diversity hiring, police work, etc. didn't register, or Chevy Chase's exasperated flailing in Vacation without needing to relate specifically to boomer midlife crisis anxiety. Hell, arguably a version of this even extends to white Americans of all ages connecting with early Eddie Murphy hits like Coming to America and Beverly Hills Cop, despite both being rooted in extremely specific observational humor about Black American cultural experience clashing against the rest of American experience.
Hey! Did you see this shit? I can describe all of them.
Please move to the side of the car and put your hands on the hood.
Why? What's with you guys?
You heard what he said, sir. Do it right now, please.
What kind of shit is this, man? Hold up. Wait a second. You guys are arresting me for getting thrown out of a fucking window? I got thrown out of a window, man!
And that not every comic who came up through the 70s new comedy revolution in stand-up and TV could strike that two-lane poise successfully was the great sorting of the era, and probably the main reason that comics who broke out in the world of sketch comedy from sources like SNL and Second City very quickly became the presumed go-to source for comedy feature leads, a tradition that largely continues to this day. But Adam Sandler, while he did in fact hail from the world of SNL, was not part of that generation, and thus arrived under related, entirely different circumstances. By the time Sandler arrived as a featured member of the so-called not ready for primetime players, Saturday Night Live was well into its third generation as a talent farm for would-be comedy megastars, hitting its 1990 stride as a revived entity under the leadership of returning Lorne Michaels.
Man, I'm glad I called that guy.
Sandler had already been performing stand-up and releasing comedy albums of his own, but SNL was where the majority of his audience would first discover him, and right from the get-go it was obvious that something was different about his sensibilities even from the rest of what was at the time one of the most eclectic eras of the show's ensemble.
Out of an estimated 50,000 professional house-sitters in the world, the Hurley Boy is by far the best.
Just say yes to me bringing in your mail, please. Don't look away. Look at me. I honestly and sincerely would like to bring in your mail.
He's a good, hard-working boy. Let him bring in your mail.
By the early 90s, the SNL performer formula was pretty well established, with most successful players operating in the mold of the giants who'd come and gone before onto success in many of the aforementioned 80s comedy blockbusters. Your successful SNL, really your successful American sketch show comic in general, would be expected to have at least one or two signature characters who could hopefully become recurring favorites as the star attraction of specific sketches like Wayne's World, Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, It's Pat, basically the sort of character you could maybe turn into a movie someday, a celebrity impression you could own, and a litany of other personas that could appear in other sketches, guest characters on Weekend Update, whatever. Part of the formula aspect of this was just the logical pragmatism of putting out a weekly show, but part of it is also the aspect of operating within a legacy.
All right, here's the deal. Your name is Donald R.D. Chico. Got that?
Donald R.D. Chico?
Yeah, that's you. D-E capital C-I-C-C-O. You were born August 11th, 1951 in Brockton, Massachusetts.
Brockton, Massachusetts?
Oh, it's a lovely town there. And your name is what?
Donald R.D. Chico?
That's right, you are. It's nice to see you. Your wife's name is Mary Margaret Rowney, born June 26, 1955 in Narragansett, Rhode Island. But you're from where?
Brockton, Massachusetts?
Hey, my mother's from there.
By this point, many sketch comedy pros, especially young guns like Sandler, were in fact young enough to have been themselves the kids watching the Belushis, Aykroyds, Chases, and Murphys jump from the sketch stage to the big time and only get half the jokes until they were old enough themselves.
Boy, they're really socking it to that Spiro Agnew guy again. He must work there or something.
That sense certainly shows up in a lot of cast member memoirs and backstage stories, and so does the common origin story shared by so many comedians in general throughout history of being a class clown or the funny one in their family who learned to act out humorously for attention, affection, or as a coping mechanism and decides to make a career out of it. One more key aspect in which so many children in general relate to comedians.
Some of the kids, anti-Semitic, used to throw pennies at me, but I saved those pennies, and now I have my own business. And I make them all work for me. And I make them call me Mr. Boss Man.
After all, most people, even those who aren't class clowns or never needed to use humor as a defense or to diffuse anything, can probably still remember how exhilarating it was as a child to first discover the idea that certain things were funny, that you could make yourself or other people laugh and feel good and silly, even happy just by doing or saying absurd, funny, maybe even inappropriate things.
Are there comedians from New Hampshire aside from yourself?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. I bet if they were, they would be very funny.
Yeah.
Funny faces, rude noises, bad words, etc. That specific dopamine hit of I just got approval for doing something off is pretty much the bitten by a radioactive spider part of every comedian's origin story, and so it was for Adam Sandler.
I'm away from home. I am away from home. It's horrible being away from home. I talk to my father a lot on the phone. He's always like, marry a girl with the same beliefs as the family. That's a big thing. Marry a girl with the same beliefs. I'm like, Dad, why should I marry a girl who thinks I'm a schmuck, you know?
But while for most comics, kid in the back of the class making fart noises essentially recedes to being only the spark of their overall approach to the form, Sandler took a different approach. In fact, almost an exact inverse to the way post-1970 comedy in general grapples with its own inherent juvenilia. When you look at Sandler's best-known 90s SNL recurring features, one of the Gap Girls, Opera Man, Canteen Boy, comedy songs like Lunch Ladyland and the Hanukkah song, what sticks out is that while the content is pitched at about the same level as the rest of the show's humor, topical events and current popular culture satirized with the affect of a disrespectful edge but still within the bounds of mainstream consensus, the style was something else entirely.
Turkey with the gravy and the cranberry. Can't believe the Mets traded Darryl Strawberry. Turkey for you and a turkey for me. Can't believe Tyson gave the girl BD.
He was unsubtle, he was loud, like play to the back of the theater loud, rarely trying to disappear into a characterization. In fact, the more elaborate the character or premise, the more his performance felt calculated to scream, "This is obviously me, Adam Sandler, wearing a costume, doing a funny voice. Look at me, pay attention to me."
Eddie Vedder's even better looking in person. Oh yeah! Oh, hey! Oh, I wish he didn't have a girlfriend. Oh no! Oh, how not? I'm saying I'm gay. I'm just saying there comes a time in every man's life when he questions his own sexuality. Oh no!
Speaking of which, despite the fact that his later film and music performances would quickly indicate that he does have a real range for impression and vocal transformation, his funny voices were just that. Funny voices in the too nasal, too throaty, or too high-pitched, off-balance variety that every class clown type child knows is one of the first and easiest ways to get a laugh.
It would mean so much to me if you just let me water your plants. You like it in juice, eh?
Yeah, I do.
Juice is very good, eh?
Yeah, no, it is good stuff.
Thus you arrive at something like formula, or maybe encapsulation, of the breakout era Adam Sandler approach to comedy. Adult jokes told in the style of kid jokes.
I love you, Mama, more than pastrama, way more than Jeffrey Dahmer.
And remember what I said about 80s and 90s comedy being a period of kid audiences gravitating to the comedy genre even though they weren't really getting most of the punchlines? Well, enter Adam Sandler on Saturday Night Live, delivering material where it was the straight topical setup that the up past their bedtime viewers didn't need to understand, because the funny parts were the timeless, but especially in tune for them, language of funny voices, loud noises, and absurd visuals.
If you're not out trick-or-treating right now, there's a good chance you didn't want to spend the money on a fancy costume. Well, you really don't have to, and you still have time to get loads of candy tonight with my low-cost costume ideas. You can just use your face. Go as about to sneeze man.
Hey, I'm about to sneeze, man, and I want some candy. Look at me all squunched up like I'm gonna sneeze. Before I do, could you give me some candy? Candy?
A newspaper's great. You can go as crazy newspaper face.
I'm crazy newspaper face, and I want some candy. Give some candy to crazy newspaper face. My face ain't normal, it's a damn newspaper. Come on, extra, read all about me. I need some candy.
Whether by design or by happenstance, Sandler's preferred mode of comedy made him an instant favorite of the kid audience that was tuning into SNL mainly to see popular characters like Wayne and Garth who transcended the not ready for primetime zeitgeist due to their catchphrases and antics, and that's the audience that followed him to theaters and turned the likes of Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore into back-to-back colossal surprise hits. But further, I would argue, the reason his first hot streak was so hot came about in large part because he kept a version of that same energy going.
Being Jewish in New Hampshire was kind of difficult, you know? A lot of the kids started trouble. Some of the kids, anti-Semitic, used to throw pennies at me.
Seriously, you don't understand. This is not for sale.
No, you don't understand, canteen boy. I want that canteen.
So I imagine some of you have worked out already the overriding thesis here. Whereas the first wave of sketch-to-screen comedy blockbuster star vehicles that preceded the likes of Sandler and also Jim Carrey and the late Chris Farley, both of whom also loom similarly in this context, but they'd require separate discourse of their own for a multitude of reasons, both reshaped and were themselves reshaped by popular culture through the influence of a youth audience they didn't plan for, Hollywood comedy of the 90s overwhelmingly came prepared and understood that shift and was eager to meet it. And especially with the benefit of 21st century highlight, it seems pretty clear that Sandler, the comic with the default sensibility and delivery, most authentically, in a non-pejorative sense, juvenile himself, was among the very best suited to capitalize on this.
Ow! Nice cut, pal.
This is like a whole new school of child raising I'm doing. You give the kid options instead of orders, you know? Let him make the right decision.
You're a pioneer.
However, he gets what makes kids laugh, and if you use that style on gross-out adult humor, enough of them will like it too, is only about half the take, and maybe less than that. When you go back and look at them, some more than others certainly, what's curious about Sandler's early films is that the original criticisms that they were pretty shallow in terms of complex characterizations or grown-up dramatic stakes are still pretty much true. You don't end up finding hidden depths or unique new angles within them. Taken as separate from the humor content, it's a series of very simple morality plays, with clearly defined good guys and bad guys, and the best moments are the stretches where things are proceeding organically rather than because this is X genre of movie and this is the part where Y has to happen, which is often.
That's water from a glacier in Alaska. It was blessed by an Eskimo medicine man. It's cold. Yes, it's always cold. That's why it's so special.
Instead, one discovers that despite what was at the time often regarded as boundary-pushing crudeness, at least compared to other PG-13 rated comedies mostly being watched by kids under 12, and underneath the obvious mandate to be funny above all else, there's honestly a lot of heart in these, and wouldn't you know it, it's heart that the adults for whom Sandler was the less sophisticated part of Saturday Night Live, the argument of whether or not there really is that much difference between Sandler's approach and the topical satire, which, let's be honest, often doesn't have the time or room to actually be more than, my name is insert politician and this week I sounded like this, yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll have to wait for another day.
I'm not giving up, and neither should you.
Might be inclined to dismiss or regard skeptically, but the audience of children who thought he was the funniest guy on the planet were extremely likely to key in on, and it feels very deliberate in a know-your-audience way a lot of the time. Billy Madison is most similar story-wise to the Rodney Dangerfield classic Back to School, but whereas that film is almost wholly sympathetic to Thornton Mellon from the start, Billy Madison presents Billy as likable but clearly a bit of a selfish idiot from the start of things. In fact, the moral arc of the story ends up being about Billy not getting what he thought he wanted because he realizes he shouldn't have it.
This hotel stuff really isn't for me, so I decided to step down as chairman of Madison Hotels and give the company to Carl.
But the areas where we are clued in that Billy is actually a decent person who deserves at least a chance all pivot on the way in which he's literally an overgrown child himself, or that he relates to other children, most famously in working out how to save the kid who wets his pants from embarrassment.
Don't worry, buddy, you hang tight, I'll be right back.
Hey, look everybody, Billy peed his pants.
Of course I peed my pants. Everybody my age pees their pants. It's the coolest.
Really?
Yes! You ain't cool unless you pee your pants.
Wow. Hey man, Ernie pees pants too. All right.
But also in the introduction to Billy's fixation on the puppy who lost his way, and his invested reaction to hearing the story in class.
The part of the story I don't like is that the little boy gave up looking for Happy after an hour. He didn't put posters up or anything. He just sat on the porch like a goon and waited. That little boy's got to think, you got a pet. You got a responsibility. If your dog is lost, you don't look for an hour and then call it quits. You get your ass out there and you find that fucking dog.
Now, yes, that's funny because haha, Adam Sandler is swearing in front of kindergartners, but it's also a strong character beat. It tells us what Billy's priorities are, that he has them, what he thinks of as important, and most interestingly, that he does actually think about things and people outside of himself. The dog being lost bothers him. The kid not looking harder is offensive to his sensibilities. He has thoughts, opinions, plans, ideas of what he would do instead. This is relatable, especially the younger you are when you see this movie. It's also notable that even though Billy Madison was sold as a rowdy fantasy comedy parts, mostly feel imagined from the reverse perspective of what an actual child would consider fun about that situation, like how Billy throws himself graduation parties for every grade, but they're kid parties, and he invites his classmates.
Rolex! Thanks for the watch, Billy.
You're welcome, buddy. Wow, this is great. When I graduated first grade, all my father did was tell me to get a job.
In fact, the very thing that makes it feel somewhat disjointed as a narrative is probably why it connected so shockingly well at the box office. It's supposed to be a movie about how funny it is for Adam Sandler to be back in school, but when you watch it, it's really a movie about how awesome it would be if Adam Sandler went to your school for a week. Likewise, while Happy Gilmore ostensibly sets it up as the same working-class hero versus establishment snobs framework as every other movie about golf is wont to do, the presentation is actually more closely hewing to a framework of Happy as another adult child confronting a despised, confounding world of adults. He isn't a hard-scrabble player showing his mettle against the elitist. He's a classic Arrested Development case who doesn't even like the sport. He wants to save his grandma rather than prove something, and his issues therewith are the kind of issues a child would be expected to have with golf.
That's your home! Are you too good for your home? Answer me!
Golf has been waiting for a player like this. A colorful, emotional, working-class hero.
I will not tolerate behavior like this. Gilmore is gone.
Their phones have been ringing off the hook with people who want to see Happy. They just sold out.
Already?
It's stuffy, there's not all that much playing involved, you can't be excited and roughhouse, and instead of being a stuck-up snob, the villain, Shooter McGavin, is more of an upscale, obnoxious, white-collar douchebag. Not a fight-the-power bad guy, but a screw-you-dad bad guy.
Well, you really crushed that ball off the tee, I'll tell you what. You know, you'd be something in one of those long drive contests. Yeah, you could probably get a very good living, traveling around, hustling at driving ranges. Thanks, Phil.
That's, you know, I know what you're doing right now, and I don't like it. So why don't you just shut your trap before I put my foot in it?
Don't turn your back on me.
That it feels like more of a complete movie than Billy Madison is largely due to these dual identities fitting together a bit more naturally.
Doing the bull dance, feeling the flow, working it.
So too it is with Wedding Singer, which is the most mature of the early Sandlers, but still adheres to a fundamentally childlike vision of its own material and indeed its own subgenre. Paradoxically, the first Adam Sandler film to explicitly center a romance is the one with the least open reference to sex and sexuality, the most libidinally reserved Sandler character, and the closest to wholesome general tone and narrative, because we're basically seeing a romantic comedy not simply as filtered through Adam Sandler as the protagonist, but through the perspective POV of a kid, probably with more than a passing psychological resemblance to kid Adam Sandler.
He's acting like a real robot. A zombie or something.
He's been wanting to get married since the 3rd grade.
It makes sense. That's when Mom and Dad died. He wants to start a family of his own.
Hey, check out the cake. There's only a little groom on top.
Who's probably more interested in the comedy than the romantic part, but still has some thoughts on how that kind of thing should or shouldn't play out, not in the least obvious of ways being Sandler's very common deployment of the small child as blunt instrument of truth device.
Hey, Linda! You're a bitch.
But instead, The Wedding Singer does end up feeling, in the context of other Adam Sandler features, like a kid who loves Adam Sandler movies' view of love story movies and how grown-ups act in them, both as caricature and idealism. Robbie Hart doesn't just simply have a breakdown, he goes cartoonishly to pieces. His morally righteous view of relationships, be honest, be faithful, share things, is Disney-level uncomplicated, but at the end of the film, it's all about him realizing that this childlike view of love is sincere and expressing it in an unguarded way, because, especially compared to yet another avatar of cynical, bad, morally compromised, yuppie grown-up masculinity, he's clearly in the right and the superior person.
Do you think it would be better if maybe you took over all the arrangements?
Well, I'd like to do it together.
Yeah. But you like this stuff. I mean, it's really not my thing. I mean, God forbid I screw up the wedding flowers. You know, how could I live with myself?
Hey, he's gonna be so wasted, he's not even gonna know flowers are at the wedding.
Oh yeah, I'll buy. Somebody needs a drink.
Actually, I'm not a big drinker.
Well, I am. How about an Alabama Slammer?
Sounds like a plan.
Meet me at the bar. I gotta piss first.
Hey, yeah, have a few drinks and, drive home.
Quick sidebar here. Toxic masculinity wasn't really a phrase that existed in common parlance when these movies were made, but when you look at the way most of these films frame Sandler's character's relationship to more aggressive, falsely confident, bullying, openly misogynist male villains, establishing a line of demarcation between what we would now call toxic masculinity and rowdy, perhaps even un-PC, but otherwise basically decent, fun guy figures like how Sandler positions himself is one of the main recurring themes. Notably, this does start off right away in Billy Madison, which had a female director in Tamra Davis. And holy shit, check out the eclectic early 90s filmography on her, huh? So that's definitely not nothing.
That Veronica Vaughn is one piece of ace. I know from experience, dude. You know what I mean?
No, you don't.
Well, not me personally, but a guy I know. Him and her got it on. Woo-wee!
No, they didn't.
This man is destroying golf. I saw two big fat naked bikers in the woods off 17 having sex. How am I supposed to chip with that going on, Doug? You've got to kick him off the tour.
He's not breaking any rules, and until he does...
I heard you couldn't close the deal with Holly.
Yeah, what's the matter with that? You're not... You like women, right?
Not as much as you do, I guess.
Listen, we're gonna have a little pre-bachelor party. You want to come in and have a beer?
You're ridiculous, man. Stop all this cheating shit, moron. She's a good girl.
It's certainly there in The Waterboy, which, yes, has its problematic elements, probably more so than any other entry here, and we'll get to that. When you look at how Bobby Boucher is set up as a magnet for victimhood for its satirical dressing down of Southern football as religion culture and rural Americana in general. Yes, in terms of broad, more meaningful character interplay, Bobby overcoming his mother's over-the-top caricature of religious conservative gaslighting is more prominent, but the sports movie side of the film, and thus most of its running time and comedy scenes, are all about bullying. The way the bad team treats Bobby, the way pretty much everyone else treats Bobby, the way too real alpha mind game bullying Coach Below inflicts on Coach Klein, and the class-based bullying the rich team hands to the poor team, and the jabs at Fairuza Balk's character for being poor and having a record. I mean, this one kind of has to be the most cartoonish one, because otherwise it'd be actually as dark or darker than Punch Drunk Love eventually was.
I don't ever want you associating with little girls.
Why not, Mama?
Because little girls are the devil.
And I mean, it almost kind of feels anticlimactic since Big Daddy is the one right up front and uncomplicated on this point, but again, just like with Happy Gilmore, the marketing on this one was oddly disconnected from the actual film. The trailers and ads all sold Adam Sandler caring for a human child? What a disaster! Because that's what an adult is assumed to think.
This summer,
Do that thing I taught you the other day. That's my boy.
Adam Sandler,
How come you're not going?
Only you and my grandfather go every 30 seconds.
Big Daddy,
Let's go. Hi. What's your name? He'll write it on the wall. Mind your business.
But the movie, though told from Sandler's point of view, comes at the idea from the perspective of the younger fan base. Adam Sandler is your dad? That sounds awesome! And the movie is about Sandler doing an actual not bad job because, hey, surprise, actually not a bad guy. But also consider most movies like this still end up being fundamentally, yeah, kids are fun, but a dude needs his space, because they're presumed to be about the adult male character and pitched to an audience of the same. Big Daddy, even though it ends with the kid's actual father stepping up to do the right thing, builds Sandler's whole arc around how actually kids are great, and I like them, and I'm sad that I don't get to have this one hanging around all the time. Miss him, so now maybe I should get my shit together so now I can grow up and have a family and be someone's real dad.
I want you to be my dad, Sonny.
I know, I do too, pal. But I'm not sure that can happen exactly the way we want it. Because it seems you already have a daddy. But I'll tell you what I can do. I can be your friend. No matter what, all right? I'll always be your friend. I'll always be your family. I'll always be around.
I mean, a lot of media, when you're a kid, even media ostensibly made for you, does a lot of reinforcing that you're not really wanted around in the adult world, that you're a nuisance and you disrupt things, that your purpose is to disrupt things, and that your parents need a break from you. But now here you've got Adam Sandler, the coolest guy in the world at that point, in a movie going, no, actually kids are great and you should want to have them around. It's hard to imagine that was an accident.
Sonny, I beat you so bad in basketball yesterday.
Well, then I guess from now on I have to stop letting you win.
I stopped letting him win 6 months ago. He's still beating me.
That's because you suck.
Which is why it's unfortunate that certain other things can't also be chalked up to accidents. I can't imagine we have to spend a ton of time on this part, right? A lot of you probably watched this wondering how the entire thing wasn't only this, so it kind of speaks for itself. On balance, most of what Adam Sandler has done after his initial breakout streak has trended in a somewhat tepid direction. There's been a handful of really good interesting roles, a smattering of solid work, some really bad ones, but mostly forgettable, good enough to passable material that tries less and less hard to mask its intention and make work for his friends, family, and the business side of Happy Madison operation. It's not like he pretends otherwise or acts like he's supposed to be ashamed of it for some reason. One of the things people misunderstand about his role in Judd Apatow's admittedly uneven, but not because of him, funny people, is that he wasn't playing a takeoff on himself, but he does seem familiar with the type of guy he was playing, and seems to have made a conscious decision to not be that guy as a general career path.
And you didn't even cry when Mabel sang Cats. What's the matter with you?
I didn't want to lie. I don't know. I've seen it on Broadway before. It wasn't as good as it.
That doesn't excuse the likes of Pixels or Jack and Jill from being bad movies, but you know, it's kind of hard to maintain the posture of treating bad movies like war crimes when the person making them doesn't really act like any aspect of his career is otherwise about bringing world peace, you know?
Now, who's that girl? That's not a nanny, is it?
No, this is a friend of ours from China.
Oh, yeah. No, I've been on that website.
No, like an exchange student that my wife brought her into the house.
Oh, your wife's into chicks. Oh, that's nice. Hollywood.
Hollywood.
See, he always looks.
That being said, yeah, I think even people who really like the movies we just went over would acknowledge their issues up front, even if they don't find them particularly bothersome or even care all that much. The tone is often inconsistent. They tend to be directed in a by-the-numbers point-and-shoot fashion that achieves a bare minimum of capturing the gags on film, but doesn't do much to elevate the material one way or another. With the exception of Big Daddy having New York location work imposed by the plot, they're mostly aesthetically banal with a lot of overlit 90s cinematography happening, so on and so forth.
Okay, what are you doing?
I'm sorry. I used to be much stronger.
They're also often rife with missed opportunities presented by their own settings and premises and material. The Wedding Singer has 80s jokes and references, but not necessarily much to actually say about the decade itself from a looking back perspective. The Waterboy gets a decent amount of background flavoring out of the southern sports culture setting, but only really scratches the surface. There's only really a single joke at the expense of local racism.
How you doing, boy? No!
And yeah, that's the other thing. It would be disingenuous to say that 90s comedy has the same, oh wow, what was wrong with us issues as a lot of classic 80s comedy does, with, of course, some notable and deeply unfortunate exceptions.
Einhorn is a man!
But that doesn't mean you don't notice how, once again, outside of The Wedding Singer, when it comes to the early Sandler films, the female characters tend to function as plot devices, not always egregiously so. And there's the standard issues with dated insults, gay caricatures, though that thread makes a point of correcting somewhat by Big Daddy.
I'll see you at home.
All right. I'll walk in.
I gotta admit, I'm still a little weirded out when they kiss.
Why? They're gay. That's what gay guys do.
Yeah, I know, but they were like brothers to us back in school.
They're still like our brothers, our very, very gay brothers. What are you doing after this?
Going to a clan meeting?
And the recurring gags of Rob Schneider doing a vaudeville brownface, which did in fact continue well beyond any remotely reasonable lifespan, yeah.
You will need to have a witness. We cannot supply one for $100.
$100 doll hairs? It's a lot of doll hairs.
Come again?
And that's certainly not to invalidate opinions anyone might have about more recent films like the controversies that came up pertaining to the depictions of Native Americans in The Ridiculous Six, or the question of whether or not You Don't Mess with the Zohan still trivialized the plight of Palestinians, even as it attempted from the perspective of the filmmakers to adopt a nuanced view of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
I get it. You guys don't like our country.
Oh, so we are the bad ones.
I'd love to sit and discuss this with you, but I'm short on time.
I'm just saying, it's not so cut and dry. We settled here for hundreds of years!
Good point. None of my ancestors ever stepped foot in this land. No, you're right.
Hey, don't walk away!
Again, not to blow by any of that, just acknowledging, there's a reason why it's more interesting in the first place to do this video about Adam Sandler centered on the positive aspects of his most well-remembered first few movies than, say, Tom Hanks and Bachelor Party, The Money Pit, and Dragnet, though. Although, now that I say it like that, maybe that's not the worst idea either. So how to summarize this one, other than to belatedly apologize for this video being belated, because, we thought this would be a quick and fun thing back when it looked like Sandler was getting his Oscar nomination for Uncut Gems, which he deserved, and then he didn't, and then everything got shut down and thrown into total chaos by the plague. The point of this was never to change anyone's mind about a set of movies or an actor that your original reaction to was probably pretty accurate vis-a-vis your own taste to begin with, so much as to answer the challenge behind the intent of the series itself. With some exception, things that are popular tend to endure and do so for a reason, and so there's probably something there that clicked for people that they liked in the first place and continue to like now. And even though I don't go in for the kind of one-note cultural populism that says the average person is smarter than they tend to be given credit for, the average creative person and the average creative work generally is. And that means something is usually happening under the hood of even a dumb or minor artifact.
Remember when Bobby Boucher showed up at halftime and the Mud Dogs won the Bourbon Bowl, do you?
Adam Sandler is a funny guy. He's a great comedian and maybe even a better all-around live performer. At his best, he truly connects with an audience, not just his audience, but the idea of the audience. And I think it's because he ultimately comes off as genuine, even when he's doing something that by necessity requires practice and control. Just watch the portion of his now famous Chris Farley Memoriam song that topped his 2019 live shows and his big SNL return, where he's left a lyric-free space in the verse so he can just, take a moment because he needs it.
Nothing was harder than saying goodbye. Sit watching Chris's father have his turn to cry.
One more sidebar. Nobody told me that was coming when I watched that special the first time, and I don't mind admitting, I'm pretty sure I cried so hard I passed out. So even if you know that they aren't highbrow, high art, or cutting edge, and you think you're not supposed to anymore, but you nonetheless still find yourself laughing when Billy Madison chases the Penguin, or Happy Gilmore fights Bob Barker, or Robbie Hart melts down on stage.
But it all was bullshit. It was a goddamn joke. And when I think of you, Linda, I hope you fucking choke.
Bobby Boucher tackles Colonel Sanders. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, or with you. Those movies are really funny. Adam Sandler at his best is really funny. And if you haven't revisited either in a while but remember being a fan, yeah, in that context, Adam Sandler's really that good.